I just wanted to try to make a video on something that used to mean a lot to me, and it's kind of part of my life, well, even a little bit, even to this day. So a lot of you know me from either school or work, my previous jobs or whatever, family, just a lot of different things. But a lot of people know me from this video game that I used to play and compete in called DDR. So this is what this video is about, and I wanted to kind of do a test run to see, just feel it out, see how it kind of played out on social media, on like how I got into DDR and what it is to me. There's no way that I could do a video on DDR and it can only be like one 20-minute or 30-minute video. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but it would have to be multiple videos. And really, just to kind of preface it by saying, my real purpose is I would like to document the history of the beginnings of New York City DDR. Because when we talk about New York Dance Revolution, or you talk about New York anything, it's always going to be New York always has like a unique experience when it comes to anything. It could be basketball, it could be dancing, it could be music, and Dance Revolution is no exception to that. So I want to talk about my experience and like how I got involved and all that. And I would like to set it up so that I could at least interview other people, because to me this always meant a lot. It always meant a lot for me to like not only talk about who I was and what DDR was to me, but what Dance Revolution was like from other people's perspective, and the time and the energy that other people put into it. So this is like the fourth time I'm trying to make this video. Like, I tried to do it on my phone and I ran out of storage space, so I'm doing it on my computer. For those who don't know, Dance Revolution is a video game, and you've seen it. I'm pretty sure you've seen it if you've been to a Dave & Buster's or like a big arcade or a barcade, where like big arcades, you go in, you see these big machines with 4 arrows or 5 arrows if there's other DDR-like games, and you see people dancing on the machine, and there's arrows on the screen and they're following the arrows, and that's basically what Dance Revolution is, or DDR for short. In I think 1999 or 2000, DDR kind of came to the United States. It started in Japan. Not really going to get into the history of that, but like it just like it exploded, it blew up in the early 2000s in America, and I was part of that. So what happened was, in New York, in like I think mid to late 2000, it hit the arcades in Times Square, and this is around the time that there were a bunch of arcades in Times Square, and I would like to get a few people on here from that era. This is before my era to talk about that. But in 2001, I had just graduated high school. I was in a long-term relationship. I was with a girl for almost 4 years, like three and a half years. So I'm like 17, 18 years old, just graduated high school. I was a gamer. I did play video games, but I didn't know anything about Dance Revolution. The only music games I knew about were a game called Busta Groove, which was like, if you played PlayStation 1, you may or may not have played Busta Groove, and then I think that's it. I don't think I knew about any other music related games. And I was a dancer. Like I went in high school, I was a break dancer, and I used to listen to dancehall music, so I used to battle people when I would go to clubs with the Bruck Up and popping and locking. Like I was legitimately, like in my teenage years, I was a dancer. So talent shows, all that. So when DDR kind of came into my life, I was dating this girl, but on this particular day in the summer, my uncle Gerard had come. He lived upstate, and he came to New York City, and I lived in Brooklyn, and I was with him running errands. I don't know if I was gonna go back upstate with him, or I don't remember, but my Aunt Claire lived a couple blocks away from me. My mom's sister, Aunt Claire, lived a couple blocks away from me, and her daughters, Gail and Shayna, I basically grew up with them. My cousin Shayna is a couple years younger than me, and my cousin Gail is a couple years older than me. And growing up, there were different periods in time where my cousin Shayna was essentially my best friend. Like, even though Shayna was a couple years younger than me, like I loved like knowing what Shayna was doing, what she was reading, what video games she was playing. Like, me and Shayna, from my perspective anyway, me and Shayna were like that was the homie. Shayna was like my homie. So and this particular day, my uncle Gerard, who was my mom's brother, went over to my Aunt Claire's house because I was his sister for something. So I was with him, so I like tagged along. So I go into their living room, and my cousin Shayna is playing this video game with like a plastic mat in the middle of the living room, and like with the arrows on the screen. I'm like, what is this? Like, I'm a dancer, so I'm just like, what is this? She's like, oh, this is Dance Dance Revolution. I think she was kind of somewhat trying to sell it to me, like to explain it to me how to play or whatever. And I was just like, oh, like whatever. Like this, a lot of people who first come across DDR, they're like, oh, this is corny, whatever, right? So I think I played a song. I was just like, trying to step on the pad or whatever. I was like, whatever. So we left. Me and my Uncle Gerard left, and that was really it for that time period. Like, I didn't get hooked on the game or anything. Like, my cousin Shayna kept playing. I would periodically go to my Aunt Claire's house, and she'd be playing. So remember, I said I was in a serious relationship. So me and this girl split up later that year, and I was like heartbroken. It's like she broke up with me. It's whatever, like first love type stuff. I was heartbroken, and I was like depressed. So I was like at my cousin's house a lot. Like, my cousin Gail was older than me, so I would talk to my cousin Gail about it, and my cousin Shayna, and whatever. So I started playing Dance Dance Revolution with my cousin to distract myself from this breakup. And I had played it a little bit, and I think my Aunt Claire had gotten it for me for Christmas, because my Aunt Claire always got me, like, when I was a kid, my mom would spoil me and she would get me good presents for Christmas, but my Aunt Claire would always get me like lit presents for Christmas. So I think she got me Dance Dance Revolution for Christmas, or she wanted to or something. But like, I was at their house a lot playing with my cousin. Like, me and my cousin would take turns playing. So I kind of fell into the game because I needed to distract myself, because I had like just gotten out of this relationship, and I was like sad. I was like depressed, So me and my cousin started playing DDR. I was like, I'll go over her house on a Friday night at like 7 p.m. She would finish her homework because she was still in high school, and like I was in college, but like I had like messed my classes up because I just wasn't in the right state of mind at the time. So we would play from like 7 p.m. until like 1 in the morning, and I would go home, and Saturday I would call up my cousin and say, what are you doing? Like, can I come over to play DDR? Sure. Like, go over there Saturday night and play from like 6, 7 p.m. until like 1, 2, 3 in the morning. So I kind of fell into DDR because of that. Like, I was just like I was hooked. This is like, for anybody who plays DDR, this is like USA Mix. I already had a PlayStation 1, and for Christmas, whoever got it for me, my mom or my Aunt Claire, I got like the Dance Dance Revolution game and the plastic mat. The game was USA Mix, so like that's what I would play, playing on like the easiest mode. And that's how I kind of fell into playing DDR. My cousin Shayna got me into it. And she was, by that time, when I started playing, I was like a super beginner. Like, I wasn't good at the game. I was just playing it because it was like, I had already been listening to like KTU type electronic music, house music, club music, trance. Before I played DDR, I was listening to that music. And a lot of DDR music is kind of sort of related to, it's like similar music. So I was like hooked on not only the game but the music. My cousin Shayna had already been playing for a few months, so she was godlike at the game. She was playing on like already like the hardest difficulty when I started playing on the beginner difficulty. So like she was like my idol when I played, because we would play, I play something on like the lightest, like the easiest difficulty, she played on like the hardest difficulty. And it was just like, it's funny because at that time in my life I was so sad because of that breakup, but like thinking back on it, that was like one of the best times of my life. Like it was just, I was just like, that was like my life. I had a job. I had worked at my uncle had a door company at the time, and I worked at the door company, and I had worked at a company related to the door company. But like all I cared about was like hooking up with, like linking up with my cousin Shayna to go play DDR. And we were playing at home, and that was it. Like that's all I cared about. So that was the beginning of me playing DDR, and I like transferred all of my like my sadness, and you emo at that time, like you're just going through it, and I transferred all of that into like the game. At the time, that's all I knew. I knew DDR, PlayStation 1 game, plastic mat in my living room, in my cousin's living room. That's it. So eventually my cousin, she was into like the game a lot, and this is like the internet 1.0 days, like talking about like message boards, forums, no YouTube, no social media, nothing, like straight like AOL instant messenger type internet. So my cousin Shayna, she had been part of a message board, like a website called DDR Freak. So if anybody plays DDR, like back in the day, you knew about DDR Freak. So she put me onto DDR Freak. So you sign up, you make an account, you make your nickname or whatever. So I signed up for DDR Freak. My nickname was, because I was like still, even though I played DDR, I was still like in my heart, I was like, I'm a dancer. Like I don't play this game for a score. I played so I could dance. I eventually wanted to learn how to dance on DDR. So my first nickname, my like username was NotPlayin4Arrows. That was my first username. So I signed up to DDR Freak, not playing for arrows. Like I'm on the forums chatting with people, but I hadn't met anybody yet or whatever. And back in this time period, like if you talk to anybody around like a millennial or like a younger Gen Xer, they'll tell you about the arcade scene in New York. The arcade scene kind of ebbed and flowed. Like it would like hype up in the 80s and then died a little bit. Street Fighter 2 kind of brought the arcade scene back up, and then it died a little bit, and then the arcade scene was inevitably gonna die, but fighting games and DDR kind of revitalized it a little bit in the early 2000s. So there were a lot of arcades in different places in New York. Most of them were in Manhattan. My cousin Shayna took me one time to 2 arcades that, if you're part of New York City DDR history or you played arcade games around 2002, 2003, this is around like the beginning of 2002. She took me to Broadway City, and she took me to Chinatown Fair. So I don't remember which one I went to first, but I had already been to Broadway City with my friends, because at the time my friends from the hood, they were all gang members. Like these are my homies. Like, but we would go to Times Square and go into Broadway City to try to talk to girls. You know what I mean? Like I had already known about Broadway City, and I saw DDR at Broadway City. So I'm like, oh, like that's the game that I saw a long time ago. Like I'd put 2 and 2 together. And I remember my cousin taking me to Chinatown Fair, which is in Chinatown in Lower Manhattan. And it was just like this world opened up to me. Like it was like all these people, all of a sudden it wasn't just my living room anymore. It was like you would go to the arcade, and like these characters, like these people who like I had been talking to on this message board on DDR Freak were like actually in the arcade, and you're putting like names to faces. You're like, oh, that's Nilo, or that's Big Matt, or you would just put all of these names to these faces, and man, it was just like, it was like the most exciting time of my life at that time, And I have been through a decent amount of stuff in my life, good, bad, or otherwise, but like I needed that at that time of my life. And so I'm in Chinatown, like with my cousin playing DDR, and it's nerve-wracking because you're still like, it's not like a fighting game or like a racing game. Like you step on like this metal platform and everybody's watching you play this game to see how good you are, or like what your score is or whatever. So me and my cousin would always step on the pad and we would play, and she would always pick the harder song, and I would usually fail on my like easy song. And then Broadway City was in Times Square, so the arcade in the Broadway City arcade was like the more important arcade, because it was like where people showed up to like play DDR seriously. So when I went to Broadway, like Chinatown Fair, like that was not my arcade. When I eventually got into DDR a little bit more, Broadway City was like that. I was from Broadway City. It's kind of like maybe I'll make another video about this, but like the arcades, especially DDR arcades, were kind of like hoods. Like it was kind of like where you from, like where you play at. You know what I'm saying? Like you tell me where you play at, that'll tell me a lot about you. So I played at Chinatown Fair, but Broadway City it eventually became like my home arcade. But when we would go to Broadway City, it was like, it was crazy at like Friday or Saturday night. And anybody who remembers that time period would be like, you would show up to Broadway City at like 6, 7 p.m. on a Friday night. Me and my cousin Shayna, we would meet up. She would be done with her homework or whatever. I'd be done with work. We would go to Broadway City. And I'm still brand new to DDR. And I was always a shy person. So like I would go there, I would be like really introverted and shy or whatever. And there'd be like 15, 20, 25 DDR players there. The wait to play DDR was like an hour. It was like 45 minutes, an hour. Everybody's socializing with each other. There are people dating. And if you remember, whether or not you played DDR, if you remember Broadway City was actually kind of crazy back then. Like there was a lot of gangs in Broadway City. There was like a lot of like people would get stabbed there. People like the fights would break out every weekend. It was crazy, but like we would go and the DDR machine would always be lit. It was like the DDR crew was there, and me and Shayna would go, and she knew more people than me because she had already been on the forums, and her nickname was I think it was something Babylon. I think it was DDR Babylon or NY Babylon or something, but like that was her nickname. That was like who she was in the DDR community, Babylon. And I would go, and she knew people, and I would go on the pad and it would be playing like my beginner song, and I would fail or whatever. I didn't really know too many people there at the time. And over time I got to know more and more people, but that was gradual, because at first I was just really like I was like kind of introverted. I didn't really talk to anybody. And little did I know that this was going to become one of the most important parts of my life. But Broadway City was crazy. Like you would go, you would see people would just put their jackets and book bags in like one giant pile, and like you would just hang out. Like you would hang out, you would get like a bottle of water or something to drink, and it was great. Back then, this is the beginnings of DDR. So if you're like an actual DDR player and you still play, or you remember, this is like the beginning of Dance Dance Revolution in this country. And this is like when freestyle was just as important, if not more important, than like Perfect Attack. So if you don't play DDR, people who played would do something called freestyle, where they would come up with like a dancing routine to the arrows and like go up on the stage and like dance, like come up with this routine, and it would look cool, and people would be like, oh, like it would look cool. And then or you could do that, or you could just play for a score, where you would play really like stiff, which is probably how most people have seen other people play DDR, where you just try to get like a high score on a song and you don't care about how you look in terms of dancing. So in Broadway City, there were so many people who would go there and just come up with dance routines on the pad. It was like the beginning of like any type of creative community that you could think of, like a dancing community or breakdancing community. People weren't doing this for money. There was no money involved. It was just the pure passion of like this new video game and this community. And it was great. So I always went with my cousin though. Like I didn't know enough people and I wasn't social enough to go by myself. So it was just a great time. I could make a whole video just elaborating on Broadway City alone, but Broadway City and Chinatown Fair were the two spots in the beginning when I started playing DDR. And this is around the time that it was like DDR, the version of DDR was called Third Mix. So this is like Third Mix. This is before any 10-footers. So like if you play DDR, you know about 10-footers, which are different now. But for those who don't know, like 10-footers were these songs that got introduced later on in DDR, where they were really difficult at the time because nobody had played DDR at that level. So this is before 10-footers. The hardest songs in the game were these songs called 9-footers. The footer is like a grade of like how hard the DDR song is. So like there was like 9-footers. Like the hardest songs in the game at the time was like songs like Afro Nova, Paranoia Evolution, Trip Machine. Like those songs were like, if you could even pass those songs, it was like a big deal. Like this is like my life at the time. Like I'm like, yo, one day I want to be able to pass Paranoia. And that was like a big deal. There were other arcades scattered around the city. There were a couple of DDR machines in Coney Island, which I can make a whole video about. That's a different story. There was an arcade in Queens called New York Dance Sports. We called it NYDS for short. And that was also like a solid DDR hub. And within the DDR community, there were sub communities of like people who, like, if you mainly played at NYDS in Queens, but you would come to Broadway City every once in a while. You mainly played at Broadway City, but you would go down to Chinatown Fair every once in a while. And these sub communities would, like, it kind of dictated like the flow of the evolution of DDR in New York City. So every once in a while, me and my cousin, like, she would be like, oh, I know about this arcade in such and such, and we would go to an arcade in Queens, like New York Dance Sports or Coney Island, and she would say, oh, I want to go to blah 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 arcade, and we would go to this arcade, and I would always go with my cousin. And so eventually I started going by myself. I remember the first time I went to go play DDR by myself was in Chinatown Fair, and I went to go play DDR by myself. I had on a pair of Timberland boots, and I remember they were so heavy that I was like, I failed my song. I was really embarrassed. There were like a bunch of people in the arcade, and I failed. And I was like, I'm never gonna play DDR in boots again, because it was just like I had embarrassed myself. Like an easy song, I failed in Timberland boots. But I started going to the arcade by myself, and that was a big deal for me. Like, it was like a big deal for me at the time. I'm probably gonna wrap this video up soon because it's going on like almost 30 minutes. But that was the beginnings of like DDR for me, and like I was like a nobody in this community at the time. Like nobody really knew who I was. Like my cousin Shayna was like more well known, but I was just like one of like a few hundred DDR players in New York who were like playing on like the easiest mode. But I started playing more and more, and I really utilized playing at home. I would practice at home all throughout the week. Monday to Thursday, I would play at home and practice and practice and practice. And then whatever I learned on Friday, I would go to the arcade and I would try to implement what I learned. And There was another good arcade in Times Square called Laser Park, which is like a whole nother. I can make a video about Laser Park too. But I would go to, me and my cousin came up with this routine for this song called Only You. It's like it was like this kind of cheesy like old song called Only You. And we practiced. I remember going to Laser Park with my cousin because nobody was at Laser Park really, like unless it was really late. So we went to Laser Park and practiced our routine to eventually do it at Broadway City. And I don't think we ever did, but like that was like the plan. Like we were gonna come up with this cool routine for Only You, and then go do it in Broadway City because that's where you did your routines back then. Like you wanted to show them off. But Laser Park was also a really good arcade at the time. As more and more as I started playing and I got a little bit better, I got more involved with the community. That's a lot of filler that like probably would require its own video. But this is all on like Third Mix. That's the version of DDR. I feel like a big turning point in New York was when we got upgraded, when all the machines got upgraded. In New York City, we always skipped a version. I don't know why. All the arcades never kept up with the DDR version. So there was Third Mix, there was Fourth Mix, but we didn't really have a Fourth Mix in New York City. If there was a Fourth Mix, there was no Fourth Mix in Broadway City, there was no Fourth Mix in Chinatown Fair. But we went from Third Mix to Fifth Mix. And when we got Fifth Mix, it changed everything because Fifth Mix was a really good mix. It had a lot of songs on it, and it was like a clean mix. And that's kind of when a lot of people from my era, I would say like I would have to ask somebody from like the older era, like if you're watching this video and you're part of JDS, like you're like an OG, you know what I mean? Like I always try to give people their flowers. So like if you're JDS, if you're from like Third Mix era, USA Mix, if you played at Barcode, that was another arcade on Times Square that was good. If you know, Barcode was a pretty cool arcade. I wish that arcades like that were still open, but I feel like my era was like the Fifth Mix era. I came into DDR around Fifth Mix, and like I would say like, you know, people like Dorian, Spider-Man, and Sean Ironfoot. Those are like the OGs of New York City DDR, and they're like first generation. And I think there were people in between them and me, like maybe Stefan, who I'll definitely talk about at some point. But yeah, like there are people between them and me, but I came in around Fifth Mix, so like I'm like second, third generation DDR. So when Fifth Mix came onto New York City, it was like a big deal. And this is still like the beginning of like my journey to DDR. Like I was still not playing for Arrows. That was like still my nickname. And when Fifth Mix came around, it was like there was so many songs on that mix and so many opportunities and so many dance routines that people just like the game blew up. Like it really pushed the game forward, at least in New York City. And that's when I really got into DDR, because the mixes, like the mixes would come out in the arcade, and then a few months later maybe, they would come out for like PlayStation 1, but they would come out for like Japanese PlayStation 1s. So what we all did, a lot of us anyway, we would get our PlayStations modified so that we can play Japanese games on our PlayStations. So like I had a modified PlayStation 1 that could play Japanese games, and when Fifth Mix would come out for PlayStation 1, I would go to certain places. I think JNL Video was like the main place that we would go, and I would buy the Japanese Dance Dance Revolution Fifth Mix so I could play it at home. And that was like a big deal, like when you can get like a home version of like a DDR mix. So Fifth Mix really pushed the game forward, and like Fifth Mix was like the last mix that I played where I was just like generally part of the community, and I didn't really try to do anything crazy. But those times, this is like 2002. This is like the beginning of like the first 9 months of 2002, the end of 2001. That third mix to fifth mix era, that it had a feeling to it. It was such a good time because everything was fresh. This was like brand new. Like, there's a saying, and I don't know if I'm gonna get it right, like, but you don't know, it's like something to the effect of, you don't know that you're in the good times until like you're not in the good times anymore. And that was one of those times where I knew something special was going on with like being part of this experience of like Dance Dance Revolution. And yeah, playing third mix to fifth mix in Broadway City in Chinatown Fair with my cousin, some of the best memories of like my life at that time. I think I'm gonna stop the video there because like if I feel comfortable with the way the video is, I would like to talk more about like just to document it. Like, I don't expect this to get like millions of views or anything like that, but just to document like my experience with DDR in New York, and like potentially talk with other people about like their experience, and like just to like pinpoint the history, because this means so much. It means so much to me, and I feel like it means a lot to a lot of other people. And DDR is not like So You Think You Could Dance or Dancing with the Stars or NFL football. So like, this history will get lost in time. Like, nobody will care about this. But at least if we can get some kind of recorded interviews or podcast about this, it would make me really happy. So I'll just stop at like, I was not playing for Arrows. We were playing fifth mix. Me and my cousin Shayna were like obsessed. We were like hooked on DDR. And that was like a time. That was like a really good time. So if you're watching this video and you did play DDR, whether it was like part of the DDR community or you just played casually, you didn't know anything about the DDR community, let me know what your experience was. I'm curious. I would like to know. And you know, if you're interested in like talking about your experience with DDR, like hit me up, like DM me, so we can set something up and maybe do like a nice interview where, you know, we just talk about DDR. I love talking about arcade stuff around that time period. I love talking about DDR around that time period. I don't get along with the community. I don't really see eye to eye with like a lot of the stuff in the DDR community nowadays. Like, I pulled away from the community in 2005, which if I keep up with this, I'll talk about that. But I love talking DDR. I'll talk about DDR with anybody as long as it's respectful and there's no trolling involved or anything like that. So, you know, I appreciate anybody who listened to this. I hope that like there was some nostalgia involved for anybody who listened, who used to play DDR. And yeah, let me know what you think about this video, or like if you played DDR, like what your experience was back then.